hiring people smarter than me is a strong philosophy. Getting out of their way, letting them do their thing and run their department as they see fit. So I would say there's a fine balance, if we're just talking about leadership and how I operate our sales team, right? Of a mix of autonomy, especially in this day and age, right? With us all being remote, there's challenges, pros and cons to that. I could go into that as well, but there is this mix of providing autonomy to have the creative freedom that SDRs, account executives, everybody in those roles need to have to break through the noise. But at the same time, having the data, in my opinion, that you can make just driven decisions on that allow us to all be pointed into the right direction in the North Star. And so I think that I've seen that from my past, in my story, where I've worked for a company actually. Obviously, won't name names, but everything was very controlled and tight, and it was, even though it was a salaried position, it was clock in, clock out, like 8 to 5, and my boss would call at 8 o'clock every morning to make sure you were sitting at your desk. Like, it was like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Bad Bosses, right? Or like Horrible Bosses, but like that was one of the things that really impacted me, right? Is like there was no trust, right? So like, if we can establish that trust, and if I hired you, then I trust you. It's not, you don't earn my trust, it's your trust to lose. That's my philosophy. And so I could literally care less when our team, when they do their job, at what time of the day, as long as they meet, are attending the internal meetings that we have. I literally tell them, like, look, you have the freedom to go to the grocery store when you need to, go to doctor's appointments. If you want to go to the golf course at lunchtime or go work out whenever you want to, that's up to you, right? And so you can manage your own schedule, and we'll teach you how to manage your own schedule. But there's this balance that I think that is easy to lose, and there's a fine tension, in my opinion, from, again, giving that flexibility, autonomy, creativity for smart people to add value and to be smarter than I am, and mix that with making data-driven decisions. So I think like that's where my philosophy kind of boils down to on one end. And to add to that, I would say in leadership positions, especially, I think that making the right hires and hiring people that are smarter than me. All the directors on my team, I promise you, they're smarter than me in a lot of areas, right? And I want them to be that way. I don't want to be the cap or the bottleneck of how we grow. And so I think that's a key piece to me, is hiring people smarter than me is a strong philosophy. Getting out of their way, letting them do their thing and run their department as they see fit. And then again, that tension that I mentioned, that is really key. And I think a lot of people feel a lot of times.
Superb answer. Really appreciate it. It's that tension I wanted to boil down into, because it makes sense what you say. If we hire good people, we need to trust them to be the people we expected them to be. Now with data, how do we get uniformity in data when we have folks doing different things, maybe different approaches? How can we make things in an individual way that would make sense for a specific person, when you said there's a huge amount of variation for how people might execute or go about their book of business?
Yep. So when you say, when we talk about mistakes we've made and I've made in the past, I think a lot of this would be one of those, right? And I'll answer your question in a second, but I think the foundational piece of this is a lot of companies, when they're in startups or this scale up environment, they don't realize how crucial even just capturing the right data is, so that that way you can make data-driven decisions in the future. And so when we were starting out, like when I took over the sales team a year ago, we had one salesperson in our sales organization. we weren't using Salesforce, we weren't using a CRM, we weren't using anything like an outreach or a sales loft. Literally, it was just white knuckling through the process, before I joined, and which is great. A lot of startups have to do that because they're just in that startup grind entrepreneur mode. But I think what ends up happening as you start needing more people is you hire everybody, you bring them on, and then you say, all right, we're going to try to build the engine like a lot of companies do while we're in the air. And so while you're doing that, everybody is fine tuning, doing their own process, doing their own thing, because you're building the sales playbook kind of alongside of them out of necessity. Now, if it was in a perfect world, and as I've advised teams in the past, and if I could do things looking back, I would have that sales playbook built ahead of time before I hire my first SDR or account executive. I'd have all my data software ready to go and plugged in so I could be tracking everything from day one. But a lot of companies don't have that luxury because, again, they're scaling and they're at Mach 1 speed, and we're not going at 5 to 10 miles an hour here. So I think that's where I made a mistake on the beginning, right? Is we ended up, you go 6 months in, and as much as you're trying to build those foundational pieces and build the playbook and build what I call the repeatable unit, but we ended up having 500 variations of a cadence that was going out because we were giving that freedom and flexibility, and we wanted to be that company that was, that was cutting edge on, hey, you can come work for us and essentially do whatever you want to do as long as you're hitting your numbers. Well, come to find out that that's great, but when everybody's running in 500 different directions, there's never any North Star. There's never any way to coach. Because what I literally told a company yesterday or 2 days ago, when we were on a conversation, it was, hey, you hit your numbers last month. And I tell this to the reps all the time on my team. You hit your numbers last month, like this was back in the spring. But if you don't know how you got there, then you got lucky. Because there's no, if you can't tell me the why or the how on how you can create repeatable success next month also, then we're just getting, we're on hope and luck at that point, right? And so there's blending that. We realized we're making massive mistakes here. We're doing good work, we're hitting good numbers, we're growing like crazy. But if we really want to truly take this thing in companies from 4 to 8, from 8 to 20 reps, from 20 reps to 40 to 100, and so on, you would have to start developing this muscle around this repeatable unit. And so what we would do, and what we do now, is we still give the freedom and flexibility that they want and they desire, but in templatized fashion. So within confined controls to allow them to still have their unique skill set, but also while getting the data we need and multiplying the success of our top performers across everybody else on the team. And I think that's where, we're still in the middle of that process. But I think as we continue fine tuning that, as organizations can allow them to feel that freedom and flexibility while scaling with repeatable success, that's like the holy grail to me of being able to scale a sales organization. Because not everybody is the best at cold calling. Not everybody is the best or has the personality to do just, send videos in somebody's DM. Not everybody is the best at writing an email template. We can teach them all that, but sometimes their personalities lean better towards other, mediums of outreach. And so how can we come alongside you after the initial ramp period? We've learned your skill set, your personality, how your wiring is, and we can create templates alongside of you that we know that are successful, subject lines that are successful, body text that are successful, cold call scripts that are successful, and say, hey, we know that these work right now. Let's start here. And then as you go through your ramp period, now you can get more freedom and flexibility in your cadences to have a little bit more creativity, be more of yourself. And then you're probably going to do better than what we've done in the past. And now we can take those things, apply them to everybody else in the organization and say, hey, look, so-and-so is doing really well with this. Everybody else needs to start doing this now because we're all going to elevate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's almost as if it's like with a new starter, we give them some stuff we know works well, but we'll use that period to understand what works best for them and then allow them to have creativity once they get to that point.
Yeah. It's you kind of slowly, instead of just giving them all the rope at the very
Yeah.
beginning, you slowly allow them to earn more rope. Not that
Yeah.
you don't trust them, but we're going to help you understand best practices and what we've already know works, because we've done it thousands and thousands of times, and we understand, and we've failed in all these different ways. We don't want you to refail learning all these doing the same things we've already done the past 6 months. Let's start all from an even playing field, and now you can build on that with your creativity and your own personality.
Yeah, it's awesome, Derrick. There's a specific part of this process you mentioned, and it's that transition towards maturity, especially considering reps we already have. So essentially, you're saying, great, we've got lots of stuff happening, lots of creativity, people doing things. Eventually, we have to rein this into a process that's repeatable, scalable. I'm interested to hear how we get reps who are already in the org over the line with that idea, that cultural shift and that change. And particularly if there's ways we can use data to encourage folks to do this, because it's a really like transformative shift for people to get on board with, right?
Yep, absolutely. So again, I'm happy to freely give all the mistakes I've made in the past for everybody out there. So I think when it's a hard transition for a team to make, if you set the expectations, the complete 180, on the front end, right? So I would say like the first team that we hired, we probably had 3 to 4 people we hired, and it was kind of, hey, we're building the playbook, come join us, you can be creative, you can do your thing, like we're going to scale, we're on this rocket ship, go go go, like everybody says, right? And when you've set the expectations that way on the front end, it's hard to then rewire those people who have had those expectations coming in of what they've joined, to say, hey, now this is the way we're going to do things. Some people can make that transition. Some people, it feels very contradictory, or they feel this intense tension of change that it pushes back on. Whoa, we've done it this way all along. What's happening now? And so I think there's some people who you can help through that transition. Some people it's just like, hey, it's just not for me, and that's fine. But now what we've learned is setting those proper expectations on the front end or through the ramp period of, hey, here's what you're gonna experience. Here's the rope that's gonna be let out. Here's how we do things here. And not to say things aren't gonna consistently change, because again, we're moving and growing and scaling so fast. But I think using the data then, because again, we didn't have a lot of data, right? So being able to, I call it kind of like this, it's this flywheel of data, right? And so data drives to me, right? Predictability, accountability, and scalability. And like, that's how I tend to think about it. And this flywheel is you capture the data, right? You analyze the data and you implement the data. Well, a lot of companies, they wait until it's too long to start even capturing that data. So what we've done for the past 6 months is, now that we've captured that data, now we've analyzed the data, now we can be implementing that data appropriately. That's never going to stop happening, because that flywheel, you're just going to keep doing that and doing that and doing that. But I would say getting teams on board now that you can show them that while you're analyzing the data, hey, look, this is actually good for you, because now you're going to become more successful. You're going to hit your metrics more often and more effectively. And guess what? You're going to make more money. And so I think that's, at the end of the day, is like bringing alongside of them and not just saying, hey, this is what we're doing now, but as much as you can show them and back it up with, hey, this is only going to make you more successful. I think that is a key component to it. I think a way that companies can do this, and I wish we would have done this in the past in ways we do it now, is almost developing these task force or these SEAL teams, right? That go in and you test it and you A/B test it. Like, hey, here's a new process we're doing. We're going to take 2 of you, and you guys are going to do this process, or you're going to do this new cadence, or you're going to do this new decision we've done. And we're going to prove that you can hit success with it before we roll it out to everybody else on the team. Now, obviously, as you have more people, and it's hard to do when you have 1 to 2 to 3 people on your sales team, but as you continue growing, that's a way I think that allows buy-in to where it doesn't feel as just herky jerky, for lack of a better word, and just messy. So that's kind of what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense, because you can only start to have that experimentation from a solid foundation, right? Otherwise, you don't have your medium from which you're comparing a new output to.
Yeah. And I think as well, I would add to that is, when companies are starting out, and when I talk to other businesses, the earlier you can capture data is obviously great. right? But if you're not capturing the right data, then you're going in, you could be making data-driven decisions off the wrong data. And now you're way off course from where you thought or you originally should be. But even if you say your company's not right now capturing data appropriately, the only thing you have to go on is lagging indicators, right? Everything that happens in the past, I can look backwards and that's great. But what happens now when I need to see predictability only comes from being able to predict the future, right? And so now I got to start seeing what's going to happen next month, 3 months, 6 months from now, and creating leading indicators of success and predictability there. So how often now I've captured this data, again, going back to that flywheel, now that I've gone through one cycle of that flywheel of capturing, analyzing, and implementing, now I can start creating success because I can see, hey, what's already happened. Now, how can I predict the future? And there's obviously great softwares out there, to do that. But it's also starting to understand your numbers and what creates that predictability.
Yeah, understood. A really important part of the jigsaw I wanted to come on to then. If we're going to create predictable sales motion, if we're going to analyze our data, as we grow, it's almost like there's too much. We're inundated, especially if we're sales leaders and our time is limited. So what's your tip to keeping on top of data as folks grow? How have you managed it? How would you advise a company doing it if they're about to undergo rapid growth?
Yep. I would say that if I could go back and do that again, I would say that I would have a system in place, a software in place that allows me to start capturing and analyzing the right data accurately and takes all that aggregated data and boils it down. And if you don't have the budget for a software, I would definitely have a person, right? At least, so a sales ops person, a revenue operations person. When I built the sales organization here, we had a sales ops person from day one because I knew how important this was, right? Now we didn't have a lot of data to analyze because we had a lot of capturing to do. But I would say that as you become inundated with it, you start understanding in that analyzation what the appropriate big rocks are that allow you that you need without a doubt to establish that foundation to move into the future, because there's hundreds of different data points, hundreds of different things we can take a look at, ramp times, CAC to LTV by lead source, how much this person is producing ahead of this top rep. Like it goes on and on and on, right? And so like everything's important, but not everything's a priority. And so I would say that it is establishing what those priorities are for you in your business and creating, hey, what are those key metrics that we need to be tracking from a lagging and leading indicator perspective that we know without a doubt that if we're hitting these things that we can make that predictable success into the future. And so that's where I would say is boiling down all this data that you have and having the appropriate ways to analyze it, whether through software or through people or a combination of both, if that'd be preferred. And then making sure that you're prioritizing the big rocks that are going to move the needle the farthest and not getting so into the weeds and caught into, hey, what's this specific call script's second line? How is that going to impact the conversion rate from a cold call to a discovery call? Like it's just, you can't get into the weeds that deep. Now, as you grow as an organization, as you add people, right, now we're going to find ways to A/B split test as much as we can, like we do. And you can get more granular and granular and granular. But when you're starting up and you're scaling, you just got to take those big rocks and analyze them as much as possible.